Is a scrap of papyrus suggesting that Jesus had a wife really authentic? Dr. Karen King, a professor of early Christianity at Harvard Divinity School, announced the finding on September 18th at an international congress on Coptic studies in Rome. The text, written in Coptic and probably translated from a 2nd century Greek text, contains a dialogue in which Jesus refers to, quote, "my wife," whom he then identifies as Mary. Dr. King stressed that the text doesn't provide any historical evidence that Jesus was actually married, only that some 2 centuries after he died, some early Christians apparently believed that he might have had a wife. Wolf Peter Funk, a noted Coptic linguist at the University of Quebec, said that there was no way to evaluate the significance of the fragment because it has no context. It's a partial text and tiny, measuring only about the size of a small cell phone. He says there are thousands of scraps of papyrus where you find crazy things. It could be anything. He too, of course, doubted the authenticity, saying the form of the fragment was, quote, suspicious. Ancient papyrus fragments have been frequently cut up by unscrupulous dealers seeking to make more money. There are all sorts of really dodgy things about this, said David Gill, professor of archaeological heritage at University Campus Suffolk. Gill closely follows the illicit trade in antiquities. He says, "This looks to me as if any sensible, responsible academic would keep their distance from it." This question didn't just drop out of heaven about Jesus having a wife, however. It was born of the popularity of Dan Brown's controversial novel, The Da Vinci Code. This novel advocates the thesis that Jesus was in fact married to the woman we know as Mary Magdalene, that they had a child together, and that this, quote, truth was covered up by the church for self-serving reasons. But here's the evidence against the claim that Jesus had a wife. First of all, the New Testament documents are some of the most prolific and the most reliable of any ancient literary sources known to man. Not only is there no mention of Jesus having a wife in the Gospels, which record his life, but none of the other New Testament writers even hint that Jesus had a wife. If he had a wife, there would be all sorts of theological implications, including the absolute divinity of Jesus. It is a matter of historical record that many of Jesus' early disciples went to a martyr's death defending Jesus' divinity, largely based upon the witnessing of his crucifixion and resurrection. Would they have willingly died these brutal deaths and persecutions for an outrageous lie, especially if it was known among them that Jesus had a wife? I hardly believe so. Also, Jesus himself gives the hint that he did not have a wife in his own words. In Matthew chapter 19, verses 11 through 12, Jesus says, "Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven." Jesus said, "Let anyone accept this who can." You see, the bottom line is this. One can make up all sorts of theories about Jesus, but the only way to evaluate these theories is with the facts of the ancient texts that we do have. And these texts simply do not support the theory of Jesus' marriage. When someone states confidently that the non-canonical writings reveal Jesus' marriage to Mary, you can respond, well, have you ever studied what the non-canonical Gospels actually say about Jesus and any possible marriage to Mary? Of course, the answer will almost always be no, I haven't actually studied them. Well, I can tell you that I have actually looked at the non-canonical evidence, and there's nothing there. Mary appears very rarely in the non-canonical Gospels, and when she does appear, it's usually simply as a close disciple of Jesus. That's it. So in light of this so-called new revelation of a papyrus scrap, it seems possible that in the 4th century AD, several hundred years after Jesus lived, somebody wrote or copied a document in the Coptic language in which a character named Jesus uses the phrase, "my wife." If we understand this language in a literal sense, which may or may not be the right interpretation, then this fragment provides evidence that somebody or a group of people in the 2nd or 3rd century might have believed that Jesus was actually married. Or the fragment could be from a piece of fictional literature from its day. Of course, it could turn out that the fragment of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is a forgery. It could also turn out that the use of the word wife in this document is best understood in a non-literal sense. Part of what makes this case so tricky is the fact that we have very little of the original document. if there even was an original document. But even if, in the end, scholarly consensus supports the genuineness of the papyrus fragment and the literal interpretation of wife, we would still do well to remember Dr. Karen King's conclusion that the fragment, quote, does not provide evidence that the historical Jesus was married. But I can tell you this with biblical certainty. The New Testament does say that Jesus has a bride. The bride of Christ is the church. Or, to put it more simply, the true bride of Christ is anyone who belongs to God through a born-again relationship with Jesus Christ. I am a part of the bride of Christ. I pray that you are as well. Do you ever wish that you could more powerfully, succinctly, and accurately speak to the message of your Christian faith and the Word of God? This is the book you need, The Magic Man in the Sky, Effectively Defending the Christian Faith. This book has been featured on TBN, Atlanta Live, dozens of radio programs, and hundreds of markets. It was rave reviewed by the Washington Times, and it was called a must-read book. Considering the times in which we now live, you need this book. Get it today on Amazon.com or the WND Superstore.